The Forbes reporter's email sat in my inbox with a subject line that made my hands stop moving on the keyboard. Interview request, 40 under 40 innovators in biotechnology. 3 months earlier, my wife Diana had walked out of our house with 2 suitcases and a speech about needing someone who matched her ambitions. Someone successful. Someone like Trevor Blackwood, the smooth-talking CEO of our biggest competitor, who drove a Porsche and wore watches that cost more than my annual salary. Now my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from people who hadn't returned my messages in weeks. My name is Marcus Hendricks. I'm 47 years old, and I just learned that sometimes the person everyone thinks is failing is actually the one holding all the cards. Let me take you back 6 months to understand how I got here. Back when I still believed that loyalty and hard work were enough. Back when I thought my marriage meant something. Back when I didn't know that everything I'd built was about to collapse and then rebuild into something nobody saw coming. I spent 6 years in the Navy after college, working on communications systems aboard the USS Ronald Reagan. Not the exciting stuff you see in movies. I was the guy making sure encrypted signals got where they needed to go without anyone intercepting them. Attention to detail, redundancy planning, keeping critical systems running when everything else failed. Those skills stuck with me long after I left the service. When you've been responsible for communication systems that keep carrier groups safe, you learn that the boring technical details everyone ignores are usually the most important things in the room. Meridian Therapeutics hired me 14 years ago, when they were still operating out of a converted warehouse in San Diego, with 12 employees and a dream about revolutionary drug delivery systems. I wasn't their first choice. They wanted someone with a PhD in biochemistry. But their lead researcher, Dr. Sarah Chen, saw something in my application that others missed. "This guy thinks like a systems engineer," she told the founders. "He'll figure out how to make our theories actually work in production." She was right. The first 3 years, I worked 70-hour weeks translating brilliant research into manufacturing processes that could be replicated reliably. The scientists knew what they wanted to create. I knew how to make it happen at scale without contamination, without variation, without the quality control nightmares that killed most biotech startups. In 2015, when our lead compound was failing FDA trials because of inconsistent dosing, I spent 4 months rebuilding our encapsulation process from scratch. Designed custom equipment that didn't exist on the market. Wrote software to monitor molecular binding in real time. The breakthrough that saved the company came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, when I finally cracked the stability problem that had stumped everyone else. Dr. Chen cried when she saw the results. The founders opened champagne. I filed the patent applications with my name on them as lead inventor. That's important. Remember that detail. Lead inventor on 17 separate patents covering our core delivery technology. The lawyers said it was standard to put the person who did the actual development work on the patents, even though the company owned them. Just paperwork, they said. Nobody thought it mattered. Over the next 9 years, I became the guy who made impossible things possible. When our manufacturing partner in Ireland couldn't hit purity standards, I flew there for 3 weeks and rebuilt their entire quality control system. When our biggest pharmaceutical client demanded modifications that our research team said couldn't be done, I found the workaround. When the FDA required additional safety data that threatened to delay our approval by 2 years, I designed the testing protocols that cut that timeline to 6 months. The company grew from 12 people to 400. Our valuation went from nothing to 800 million. In 2019, when we finally got FDA approval for our first major product, the founders became millionaires on paper. I got a bonus check for $15,000 and a handshake. No equity, no ownership stake. Just a senior director title, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd built something remarkable. My wife Diana had different thoughts about that. We'd met in college, got married at 24, and spent the next 20 years in what I thought was a solid partnership. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, understood the industry, seemed proud of what I was building. But somewhere around year 15 of our marriage, something shifted. She started making comments about other couples we knew, about the ones who had investment properties, who took European vacations, whose husbands drove German cars instead of 10-year-old Hondas. "You work so hard," she'd say, "but what do we have to show for it?" "A nice house," I'd reply. "Retirement accounts. Stability." She'd go quiet in a way that felt like accumulating thunder. "Other men your age are VPs, Marcus. They're making real money. You're still grinding away in a lab coat like you're 25 years old." I tried explaining that I was building something bigger than a paycheck, that the patents, the systems, the relationships I developed, they were valuable in ways that didn't show up in our bank account yet. She'd nod and change the subject, but I could see her disappointment settling in like fog. The breaking point came 6 months ago at the Biotechnology Industry Conference in Boston. Meridian had a booth, and Trevor Blackwood from Apex Pharmaceuticals kept circling our display like a shark who'd smelled blood. His company was our main competitor. Bigger, flashier, better funded, but always 6 months behind us technologically. Trevor had an MBA from Wharton, a corner office in Manhattan, and the kind of aggressive confidence that comes from never having to actually build anything yourself. Diana had come to the conference with me, something she rarely did anymore. I watched her light up when Trevor started talking to her at the reception. He had that smooth executive charm, talking about his company's growth trajectory, their recent acquisition, his vision for disrupting the pharmaceutical industry. Everything was disruption and innovation and strategic positioning. Nothing about actual science or manufacturing or the boring details that made any of it work. I remember standing there with a glass of cheap conference wine, watching my wife laugh at Trevor's jokes and feeling something cold settle in my chest. Not jealousy exactly, more like recognition. She was looking at him the way she used to look at me, back when she thought I was going places. 2 weeks after that conference, Trevor called me directly. "Marcus, we've been impressed with your work at Meridian. I'd like to discuss an opportunity at Apex. VP of Manufacturing Technology, equity package, 180K base salary. Almost double what I was making." I told him I wasn't interested. I'd built something at Meridian. Loyalty meant something to me, even if it apparently didn't mean much to anyone else. He laughed like I'd made a joke. Think it over. Sometimes loyalty to a company that doesn't value you is just another word for being taken advantage of. I didn't tell Diana about that offer. Maybe I should have. Maybe it would have changed what happened next. But I was still operating under the assumption that my marriage was built on something stronger than salary numbers and executive titles. 3 months ago, Diana sat me down at our kitchen table with the kind of calm determination that comes from practiced speeches. "I've been thinking a lot about our future," she started. "About what I want from life. About whether we're still moving in the same direction." The speech lasted maybe 10 minutes. She'd been unhappy for years. She felt like she was watching her life pass by while I poured everything into a company that didn't appreciate me. She needed a partner who matched her ambitions, who wanted more from life than just technical achievements nobody outside the industry understood. She had met someone who understood her better, who wanted the same thing she wanted. Someone successful. Trevor. She didn't say his name, but I knew. I'd seen the way they looked at each other at that conference. Probably they'd stayed in touch afterward. Maybe more than that. I didn't yell, didn't argue. Years in the Navy taught me that emotional reactions during a crisis just make everything worse. I asked her one question. "How long?" "Long enough," she said. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I really am. But I can't keep waiting for you to become someone you're not." She was gone by that weekend. Moved into a downtown apartment that probably cost twice our mortgage. Within a month, she was posting photos on social media from restaurants I'd never heard of, at charity galas for causes she'd never mentioned, standing next to Trevor Blackwood in designer clothes I definitely hadn't paid for. The divorce papers arrived 6 weeks after she left. Fair division of assets, the lawyers called it. The house would be sold. Retirement accounts split. She wanted her half of everything we'd built together over 20 years. Everything except the one thing that actually mattered. She had no claim to my patents because they were owned by Meridian, and my name on them as inventor didn't constitute marital property. Her lawyer tried to argue otherwise, but the law was clear. At work, the whispers started immediately. Everyone knew. Diana worked in pharmaceutical sales. She knew people at every company in the industry. The story spread fast. Marcus Hendrick's wife left him for Trevor Blackwood from Apex. Poor guy. Must be tough. Did you see Blackwood's new Porsche? Some guys have all the luck. My boss, Richard Paulson, called me into his office 2 weeks after Diana left with a speech about focusing on work during difficult personal times. "I appreciate everything you do here, Marcus," he said, not meeting my eyes. "But I've been getting some feedback from the executive team about your engagement level lately. Just want to make sure you're staying focused on your responsibilities." My engagement level. I'd missed exactly 2 days of work in 14 years. I had 17 patents with my name on them. I'd personally saved the company at least 4 times from catastrophic failures. But my wife leaving me for a competitor's CEO apparently raised questions about my focus. Something crystallized in that moment. Something cold and clear and absolutely certain. These people didn't value loyalty. They didn't value expertise. They certainly didn't value me. They valued appearances and quarterly numbers and whatever made the executives feel important in board meetings. Fine. I'd give them exactly what my job description said, and nothing more. No more 3 a.m. emergency calls. No more weekend troubleshooting sessions. No more being the safety net that caught every crisis before it became a disaster. Let's see how well their systems ran without me quietly holding everything together. I went home that evening, opened my laptop, and did something I'd been avoiding for months. I pulled up every patent I'd filed over the past 14 years and reviewed the language carefully. 17 patents. All of them listed Meridian Therapeutics as the assignee, standard for employee inventions. But all of them listed me as the lead inventor, the person who'd actually created the technology. The patents were owned by the company, but the knowledge of how they actually worked, that was all in my head. The manufacturing processes I'd developed weren't fully documented because I'd never had time to finish the comprehensive technical manuals. The quality control systems ran on custom software I'd written with algorithms that existed nowhere else. The relationships with key suppliers and manufacturing partners, those were built on trust in me personally, not the company name. I'd spent 14 years becoming irreplaceable while everyone assumed I was replaceable. They'd mistaken my quiet competence for being easily replicated. Classic mistake. The person everyone takes for granted is often the one person holding everything together. I made a decision that night. I wasn't going to quit in anger. Wasn't going to sabotage anything. I was simply going to follow my employment contract exactly as written and see what happened when the safety net disappeared. Monday morning, I arrived at exactly 8:30 a.m. instead of my usual 7 a.m. I made coffee, checked my emails, and responded only to messages that directly involved my specified responsibilities. When the manufacturing floor called about a contamination alert in Building C, I forwarded the message to the quality control supervisor. Not my department, according to the org chart. When Dr. Chen emailed asking me to look at anomalous data from our latest clinical trial batch, I replied that she should coordinate with the analytical chemistry team per standard protocol. When Richard's assistant requested I prepare briefing materials for an FDA meeting, I noted that regulatory affairs handled FDA communications and copied them on the response. By Wednesday, people were noticing. Sarah Chen stopped by my office with a confused expression. "Marcus, there's an issue with batch 447A. The encapsulation efficiency is dropping and nobody knows why." "Did you see my email?" "I did," I said, continuing to review a supply chain report. "Did you escalate to quality control?" Yes, but they said they'd need you to review the binding protocols. This is your system. The binding protocols are documented in the standard operating procedures, I replied. Section 8, subsection 4.3. Quality control should follow the documented process, but those procedures don't cover this specific issue. We need your expertise to troubleshoot. Then quality control should submit a formal technical deviation request through the proper channels. I'll review it when it reaches my queue according to priority protocol. Sarah stared at me like I'd started speaking another language. "Marcus, what's going on? This isn't like you. I'm just being more mindful of following proper procedures," I said with a slight smile. "Efficiency through organization, isn't that what the consultants keep telling us?" By Friday, the cracks were really showing. Batch 447A's problems had cascaded into delaying shipments to 3 major clients. A critical piece of manufacturing equipment had malfunctioned, and the repair technicians couldn't figure out the custom modifications I'd made 5 years ago. Someone had discovered that our backup quality control systems weren't actually configured properly because I'd been the one manually checking everything. Richard called an emergency meeting Friday afternoon. His face was red, his tie loosened, looking like a man who'd just realized he was standing in a burning building. "Marcus," he said, his voice strained, "we need to discuss your recent change in working style." "I'm following my job description," I replied calmly. "Senior Director of Process Development. Responsible for evaluating and implementing new manufacturing technologies per the scope defined in my employment contract. You're not answering emergency calls. You're not troubleshooting production issues. You're not doing the things you've always done. Those things aren't in my job description, Richard. I've been thinking about work-life balance lately. My personal life has been difficult, as you mentioned. I'm trying to maintain better boundaries." His jaw actually dropped. "This is not the time for boundaries, Marcus. We have shipments at risk. We have clients threatening to walk. We have FDA inspectors coming in 2 weeks and half our systems aren't running properly. Then you should escalate to the appropriate department heads," I said. "I've been advised to focus on my core responsibilities." The meeting ended badly. Richard made vague threats about performance reviews. I nodded and went home at exactly 5 p.m., leaving behind an office in controlled chaos. That weekend, I didn't turn on my work phone. I didn't check email. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in 14 years. I took time to actually think about what I wanted instead of what everyone else expected from me. On Sunday evening, I drafted an email to 5 people. Dr. Sarah Chen, 2 of Meridian's original founders who'd left after the company got too big, a brilliant materials scientist I'd worked with at a Navy research facility, and a former FDA reviewer who'd moved into private consulting. The subject line was simple: Revolutionary Drug Delivery Platform, Partnership Discussion. The email laid out something I'd been developing quietly in my home office for the past 3 years. A new drug delivery system that solved several problems our current technology couldn't touch. More stable, more versatile, cheaper to manufacture. I'd filed 3 provisional patents on my own time, using my own money, careful to make sure nothing overlapped with Meridian's intellectual property. These patents had nothing to do with my employer. By Monday morning, all 5 had responded. They wanted to know more. Monday at work was chaos barely contained. The weekend emergency I hadn't responded to had resulted in a complete shutdown of our primary manufacturing line. Nobody could figure out how to restart it properly. The custom monitoring software I'd written kept throwing error codes that nobody else understood. Shipments were delayed. Clients were furious. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. I let it go to voicemail. I arrived at 8:30, made coffee, and started working on a technical review that was due in 2 weeks, very focused on my core responsibilities. Richard appeared at my office at 9:15, flanked by the VP of Operations and the Chief Technical Officer. They looked like men who'd been awake all night fighting a fire they couldn't put out. "Marcus," Richard said, his voice tight, "we need you to fix the manufacturing line. Now." I pulled up the maintenance work order in the system. "This ticket is assigned to manufacturing operations. I'm not in that department's escalation chain." "Stop playing games," the CTO said, his voice rising. "You know that system inside and out. You're the only one who can fix it." "I built that system 6 years ago," I agreed. "Trained 3 people on how to maintain it. Wrote a 50-page operations manual. If operations has questions about the documented procedures, they should submit a formal technical consultation request." "We don't have time for formal requests," Richard said. "We're losing $200,000 a day with that line down. Major clients are threatening to find alternative suppliers. Then someone should probably follow the documentation I provided and restart the system according to protocol. I'm confident the operations team is capable if they reference the materials properly." The 3 men stared at me like I'd just kicked their dog. "You're doing this on purpose," the VP of Operations said. "You're sabotaging us." "I'm following my employment contract and maintaining appropriate work boundaries," I replied. "If the company is discovering that critical systems lack redundancy, that sounds like a leadership and planning issue, not an individual employee problem." That's when Richard made his fatal mistake. "I'm putting you on administrative review," he said, effective immediately. "Restricted access to manufacturing systems pending investigation of your recent performance issues." I nodded slowly. "I understand. You're restricting my access to manufacturing systems. Can you provide that in writing, please?" He blinked, thrown off. "What?" "I need documentation that I'm being restricted from accessing manufacturing systems. For my records, given that my job description requires me to evaluate and implement manufacturing technologies. This seems like it might constitute a constructive dismissal scenario, but I want to make sure I understand correctly." The CTO's face went pale. "Richard, maybe we should discuss this with legal first." Too late. Richard's pride was wounded and he was committed. "You'll have the documentation by end of day," he snapped. "Consider yourself on paid administrative leave pending review." "Perfect," I said. "I'll work from home then. Please have HR send me the formal notification." I packed up my laptop, my files, my personal items, took the parking pass off my dashboard, dropped my building access badge on Richard's desk, left behind 14 years of institutional knowledge walking out the door in a cardboard box. The formal notification arrived via email at 4 p.m., placed on administrative leave pending performance review. Restricted from accessing company facilities or systems. Expected to remain available for consultation if needed. I replied with a simple acknowledgement and copied my personal attorney. Then I made a phone call I'd been planning for 3 days. Trevor Blackwood answered on the second ring. "Marcus," he said, and I could hear the smug satisfaction in his voice. "Heard you were having some difficulties at Meridian. That offer I mentioned is still open if you're interested in discussing it." "Actually, Trevor, I'm calling about a different kind of discussion. I have information about some significant technical vulnerabilities in your company's manufacturing processes. Thought you might want to address them before your FDA inspection next month." The line went quiet. "What vulnerabilities?" "Your encapsulation technology is based on a modified version of Meridian's approach, correct?" I designed Meridian's system. I know exactly where the weak points are, and I know that your facility in New Jersey has been experiencing unexplained quality control failures for the past 6 months. How do you know about our New Jersey facility? Your suppliers talk to Meridian's suppliers, I said. People in this industry share information, especially when they're concerned about safety issues being covered up. Trevor's voice went cold. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you professional advice. You're attempting to manufacture products using processes you don't fully understand, based on technology you reverse engineered from public patent filings. Those patents have my name on them as inventor. I know things that aren't in the public documentation, and I know you're heading for a major failure that will damage your company's reputation and possibly hurt patients. As someone who actually cares about product safety, I thought you should know. What do you want, Marcus? Nothing from you, Trevor. I just wanted to make sure you understood something. My wife left me because she thought you were more successful than me, more ambitious, better positioned for the future. I wanted you to know that the technical foundation of your company's growth is built on incomplete understanding of systems you don't actually control. Sleep well. I hung up before he could respond. That felt good. But it wasn't revenge. It was just information sharing, professional courtesy between industry colleagues. The real work began that evening. The 5 people I'd contacted over the weekend all agreed to a video call. For 2 hours, we discussed my new drug delivery platform, the provisional patents I'd filed, the breakthrough potential, the market opportunity. Dr. Sarah Chen was particularly interested. Marcus, this is elegant work. Have you considered founding a company around this? I've been considering a lot of things lately, I replied. What would it take to get something like this to market? 3 years, maybe 4, one of the former founders said. You'd need Series A funding, probably $15 million to start. Partnership with a major pharmaceutical company for distribution and sales. FDA approval process is expensive and time-consuming. What if we had Meridian's client relationships? I asked. What if we could offer pharmaceutical companies a superior delivery system through a startup that's nimble and innovative, instead of a bureaucratic mid-sized company that's lost its edge? The materials scientist laughed. You'd need those relationships, and Meridian isn't going to share. No, I agreed. But they also can't maintain them without me. Over the next few weeks, I think several of their major clients are going to discover that product quality isn't what it used to be. And when companies start looking for alternatives, I'll be ready to present one. 3 days later, Meridian's manufacturing line was still down. They'd brought in external consultants who charged $50,000 to tell them they needed the person who designed the system to troubleshoot it. My phone was getting calls from Richard, from the CTO, from the CEO himself. I let them all go to voicemail. The 4th call was from Diana. That one surprised me enough that I answered. Marcus, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I heard you're having problems at work. News travels fast, I replied. How are things with Trevor? She ignored the question. Look, I know things ended badly between us, but Trevor mentioned you called him with some concerning information about his company. He wanted me to reach out and see if we could talk. Maybe smooth things over. So you're his messenger now, I said. That's an interesting role for you. Don't be petty, she snapped. This is business. Trevor thinks maybe you'd be interested in consulting for Apex. He'd pay well. Might help with your current employment situation. Tell Trevor I'm not interested in consulting for a company that's built on incomplete understanding of technologies they've attempted to copy. And Diana, I'm glad you found someone who matches your ambitions. I hope you enjoy watching his company face FDA sanctions in about 6 weeks. I hung up. That felt even better than the first call. Week 2 of my administrative leave, Meridian's situation deteriorated dramatically. Not because of anything I did, just because systems I'd been holding together through improvisation and personal knowledge started failing without me there to catch them. Batch after batch failed quality control. Shipments were delayed. 2 major pharmaceutical clients terminated their contracts and moved to competitors. Stock price dropped 15% in a single week. The CEO, Donald Vickers, finally called me personally. "Marcus, we need to talk. Can you come to the office?" "I'm on administrative leave," I reminded him. "Restricted from company facilities." "That was a mistake," he admitted. Richard overreacted. "We're prepared to reinstate you immediately with a formal apology and a salary adjustment. 20% increase. How does that sound?" "It sounds like too little, too late," I replied. "But I appreciate the offer." "What do you want, Marcus?" "Just tell me what it will take to fix this. Full reinstatement with VP title, 60% salary increase, reporting directly to you, and equity stake of 2% immediately vested with options for another 3% over the next 2 years. Plus Richard Paulson removed from any authority over my department." There was a long silence. That's a significant ask. "It's a fraction of what you're losing every day. I'm not there," I said. "And honestly, Donald, I'm not sure I even want to come back at those terms. I've been thinking about other opportunities." "What opportunities?" "That's private," I said. "But you should know that 3 of your major clients have reached out to me in the past week asking if I'd be interested in consulting independently. They're concerned about Meridian's recent quality issues." This was true. Pharmaceutical companies talk to each other constantly. When a supplier starts having problems, everyone in the industry knows within days, and when they know the technical genius behind that supplier is suddenly available, they start making calls. "Marcus, let's meet in person," Donald said. "Tomorrow morning." "Name the location." "I'll think about it," I replied. "I'll let you know." I didn't call him back the next day, or the day after that. Instead, I spent that time meeting with venture capital firms about my new drug delivery platform. Turns out that when you have 17 patents with your name on them at a major biotech company, VCs are very interested in hearing about what you might do next. The pitch meetings went better than I'd imagined. I presented the technical innovation, the market opportunity, the limitations of existing solutions. I explained how my years at Meridian had given me deep relationships with key pharmaceutical companies who were frustrated with current options. Several firms asked to see provisional patents. 2 requested detailed business plans. 1 offered preliminary terms for Series A funding right there in the meeting. Week 3 of my administrative leave, I filed formal company incorporation papers. Hendrix Biopharma Solutions, LLC. Offices in San Diego. 4 co-founders, including Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd quietly resigned from Meridian the week before. Patents filed. Initial funding committed. We were real. That's when Forbes called. The email came from a senior editor in their biotechnology coverage team. "Mr. Hendrix, we're preparing a feature on innovative drug delivery systems, and several sources have mentioned your work at Meridian Therapeutics. We'd also heard rumors of a new venture you're founding. Would you be interested in discussing your career and vision for an interview? We're considering you for our 40 under 40 innovators list." I read that email 3 times before responding. 3 months ago, my wife had left me for a more successful man. 3 months ago, I'd been an underappreciated senior director with no equity and a boss who thought I was replaceable. Now Forbes wanted to interview me for a major feature on biotechnology innovation. The universe has a sense of humor sometimes. I agreed to the interview. It was scheduled for 2 weeks out, which gave me time to make sure everything was positioned correctly. The Forbes reporter, a sharp woman named Rebecca Mitchell, did her homework. She called Meridian for comment. She spoke with former colleagues. She reached out to pharmaceutical companies I'd worked with. She dug into patent filings and FDA submissions. What she discovered was a pattern nobody at Meridian had wanted to acknowledge. Every major breakthrough the company had achieved in 14 years had my name on it. Every critical approval, every technical innovation that drove revenue growth. The institutional knowledge that made Meridian valuable wasn't distributed across the organization. It was concentrated in one person who had been systematically undervalued. The interview itself was fascinating. Rebecca asked pointed questions about why I'd left Meridian, what had prompted starting my own company, how my new technology compared to existing solutions. I was honest but diplomatic. Sometimes you realize the organization you've been loyal to doesn't share your values or vision. Starting fresh lets you build something better from the ground up. She asked about the timing. From what I understand, you left Meridian quite suddenly. There were rumors of performance issues. I smiled at that. Rebecca, I spent 14 years making sure Meridian's systems never failed. The moment I stepped back and let those systems run according to their documented procedures, everything fell apart. That tells you whether there were performance issues and whose performance was actually the problem. The interview ran long. We discussed technical details of drug delivery systems, the future of biotechnology, what innovation really meant versus what companies claimed it meant. Rebecca was impressed with the depth of knowledge I brought. "This is exceptional work," she said finally. "I can see why pharmaceutical companies value your expertise." "One more question," she added. "I noticed that Trevor Blackwood from Apex Pharmaceuticals declined to comment for this article. Any idea why?" "Trevor and I have a complicated relationship," I said carefully. "I believe he's dealing with some technical challenges at his company right now, manufacturing issues. These things happen when companies try to scale too quickly without proper foundational systems." Rebecca made a note. "Interesting. Apex is also your biggest competitor." "Was," I corrected. "They were Meridian's biggest competitor. My new company isn't competing with Apex. We're making them obsolete." The Forbes article published 6 weeks later with a cover featuring 4 innovators in biotechnology. I was second from the left, standing in our new laboratory space, holding a prototype of our revolutionary drug delivery device. The headline read, "The Quiet Genius, How Marcus Hendricks Left Corporate Biotech to Build Something Better." The article was devastating for Meridian. Rebecca had documented how the company's recent failures traced directly to my departure. She'd gotten quotes from FDA reviewers noting quality control problems. She'd found pharmaceutical executives willing to say on record that Meridian wasn't the partner it used to be. And she'd made it very clear that the technical brains behind Meridian's success was now building something that would compete directly with them. But the real damage was in a sidebar article that ran alongside the main feature. Rebecca had done additional reporting on Apex Pharmaceuticals and Trevor Blackwood. She discovered that Apex's manufacturing facility in New Jersey was facing serious FDA scrutiny over quality control violations, that several batches of their flagship product had been pulled from distribution, that Trevor's aggressive expansion strategy had created technical vulnerabilities the company wasn't equipped to handle. The sidebar included a telling quote from an unnamed industry source. Apex tried to compete by copying Meridian's technology without understanding the underlying science. Now they're dealing with the consequences of building on a foundation they never really controlled. That unnamed source was me. But Rebecca kept her promise not to attribute it directly. The Forbes article hit the industry like a bomb. Within a week, 3 pharmaceutical companies reached out to discuss partnerships with Hendricks Biopharma. 2 wanted exclusive licensing deals for specific therapeutic areas. 1 offered to acquire us outright for $45 million. We declined. We were building something bigger. Meridian's stock price dropped another 20% the week after the article published. Donald Vickers called me again, more desperate this time. "Marcus, please. We'll give you whatever you want. Equity, board seat, complete technical authority. Name your terms." "I'm not interested, Donald. I'm building something new." "But I appreciate you calling. What about consulting? Just help us stabilize our systems. We'll pay premium rates." "I don't think that's a good fit," I said. "But I do know some excellent consultants who specialize in rebuilding technical operations after key personnel departures. I can send you some names if you'd like." I never sent those names. Meridian could figure it out themselves. The really satisfying part came 2 months after the Forbes article. I was at an industry conference in San Francisco when I saw Diana across the hotel lobby. She looked tired, older somehow. The designer clothes were still there, but the confidence wasn't. She saw me and hesitated, then walked over with a tight smile. "Marcus, congratulations on the Forbes feature. Very impressive." "Thank you," I said. "How are things with Trevor?" Her smile got tighter. "Trevor's been under a lot of stress. Business pressures. You probably heard about Apex's FDA problems." "I may have read something about that," I replied. "I'm sorry it's been difficult." "Are you?" she asked, and there was an edge in her voice now. "Are you really sorry? Or are you enjoying watching everything fall apart for him?" "I'm not enjoying anyone's problems, Diana, but I'm also not responsible for them. Trevor made business decisions based on incomplete technical understanding. Those decisions had consequences. That's not personal. That's just reality." She stared at me for a long moment. "You've changed," she said finally. "You're different." "No," I replied. "I'm exactly who I always was. You just weren't paying attention. You were too busy looking at people who seemed successful instead of people who were actually building things that mattered." "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said quietly. I wanted more." "You wanted what looked impressive," I corrected. "Big titles, expensive cars, social media validation. You mistook that for success. Real success is quieter. It's harder to see until you step back and let systems run without you. Then you find out what was actually holding everything together." Diana opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but couldn't find the words. Finally, she just nodded once and walked away. I watched her cross the lobby toward the exit, shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. I didn't feel satisfaction exactly, just a kind of quiet closure. That evening, I got a call from Trevor Blackwood. "Marcus, we need to talk. Face to face." "I don't think we have anything to discuss, Trevor." "Please," he said, and there was something desperate in his voice. "I made mistakes. I see that now. But Apex employs 300 people. They don't deserve to lose their jobs because of my pride." "That's true," I agreed. "They don't. But I'm not the solution to your problem. You built a company on foundations you didn't understand. Now you're dealing with the consequences. That's not something I can fix for you. What would it take? What do you want?" "I want you to understand something, Trevor. You thought taking my wife meant you'd won. You thought success was about appearances. The car, the office, the executive presence. You never understood that real value comes from what you can actually do, not what you look like you're doing. My wife left me for you because she made the same mistake. She confused status with substance. How's that working out for both of you?" I hung up before he could answer. That conversation felt like the final piece clicking into place. Not revenge exactly, just clarity. Just the universe correcting itself toward truth. 6 months after the Forbes article, Hendrix Biopharma closed a Series B funding round at a $200 million valuation. We had partnership agreements with 4 major pharmaceutical companies. Our new drug delivery platform was entering clinical trials with projected FDA approval in 2 years. I owned 35% of the company. On paper, I was worth $70 million. More importantly, I was building something I believed in with people I trusted. I worked reasonable hours, made time for things that mattered, started dating again. A brilliant regulatory affairs consultant who appreciated that I knew the difference between status and substance. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine in a way it had never been when I was desperately trying to prove my value to people who couldn't see it. The last piece of the story came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Chen called me one evening with news. "Marcus, you need to hear this before it goes public. Meridian is being acquired, sold to a European pharmaceutical conglomerate at a 40% discount from their peak valuation. Donald Vickers is stepping down. Richard Paulson was terminated 6 months ago, and the company had to pay out his contract in full because they couldn't document cause. Trevor Blackwood at Apex just resigned under pressure from his board. The FDA sanctions were worse than anyone knew. I absorbed that information silently." "How do you feel about it?" Sarah asked. "I don't feel anything," I said honestly. These were predictable outcomes of predictable decisions. Companies that don't value their key technical people fail. Leaders who prioritize appearances over substance get exposed eventually. The math was always going to work out this way. "You sound very calm about it." "I spent 14 years being undervalued," I said. "Then I spent 3 months being angry about it. Then I spent 6 months building something better. Now I'm just grateful I finally understand my own worth. Everyone else can figure themselves out." Sarah laughed. "Forbes called me for a follow-up. They want to do a feature on Hendrix Biopharma's rise and Meridian's fall. The narrative they're seeing is that you were the secret to Meridian's success all along." "That's not quite right," I said. "I was part of what made them successful." But they forgot that technical expertise isn't replaceable just because it's quiet. They confused someone who didn't demand attention with someone who wasn't valuable. Classic mistake. Expensive lesson. The Forbes follow-up feature ran 2 months later. This time I was on the cover alone, standing in our new manufacturing facility with the headline, "Built to Last: How Technical Genius Beats Corporate Politics Every Time." The article traced the complete arc: Meridian's rise with my innovations, their decline after my departure, and Hendrix Biopharma's emergence as the new leader in drug delivery systems. There was a paragraph near the end that I particularly appreciated. "In an industry that often values MBAs over PhDs and executive presence over technical depth, Marcus Hendrix' story is a reminder that substance eventually beats style. The companies that succeed long-term are the ones that recognize and value the people who actually know how to build things, not just the ones who know how to talk about building things." I framed that paragraph and hung it in my office. Not as revenge, not as validation, just as a reminder. A reminder that the quiet work matters. That loyalty to yourself is more important than loyalty to organizations that don't value you. That sometimes the best response to being undervalued isn't anger or sabotage. It's simply stepping back and letting reality demonstrate your worth. My wife left me for someone she thought was more successful. 3 months later, Forbes called for an interview. A year after that, I'd built something worth more than everything the successful man had. The universe doesn't always give you justice, but sometimes it gives you clarity. And clarity is better than revenge. If you've ever been told you're not good enough, not ambitious enough, not successful enough, remember this. Success isn't about who has the biggest office or the fanciest title. It's about building things that actually work. It's about knowing your value even when others can't see it. It's about having the courage to walk away from people and places that don't recognize what you bring. The people who undervalue you aren't your problem. They're their own problem. Your job is just to keep building, keep creating, keep doing the work that matters. Eventually, reality has a way of sorting everyone into their proper place. You just have to be patient enough to let it happen. And when Forbes finally calls, and if you've been doing real work all along, they will call, you'll be ready. Not because you are trying to prove something to the people who didn't value you, but because you were too busy building something remarkable to waste time on revenge.